welcome to National Herald. I'm Rukmini Sen.
There's a plea in Supreme Court that challenges centre's policy to sell 25% vaccines to private hospitals. The application filed by Rajya Sabha MP from Kerala, John Brittas, and Professor R. Ramkumar of Tata Institute of Social Sciences says that the policy will in effect cause a reservation for the rich and urban people alone. Citing statistical studies, the applicants say that the contribution of private sector towards vaccines like tuberculosis or polio have been negligible.
Joining me are my two guests, Rajya Sabha MP from Kerala, John Brittas, and Professor R. Ramkumar of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. My first question is to Mr. Brittas. Sir, you've just become the Member of Parliament, and as you corrected me a few minutes back, not just, actually 2 months back. Tell me, why was this application so important to you?
Mani, thank you very much for organizing such a discourse, such a debate. We do want a debate in this country on this vaccination policy of the government of India. As you all know, the country has got a policy with regard to vaccination. That is a policy which we accepted in 1978. That is universal and free vaccination. Now the policy that has been doled out to us is completely skewed on many fronts. I will come to that, and my colleague Mr. Ram also will come to that. And if you look at the trajectory of the policy that has been evolved by Mr. Narendra Modi, before the strictures passed by the Supreme Court, it was in a mess. But even now, it is so opaque. It's so opaque. And it can lead to one of the biggest health scandals in the country. Now, when I talked about 1978 universal and free vaccination, now every country worth mentioning in the world is going for free universal vaccination. Take it US, take it UAE, and we have so many friends in UAE, and there even the booster vaccination doses are free. That means they have completed 2, and now they have started with the booster dose. Even that is free. And it is free for everyone. Even if you visit UAE, suppose if you were to be one of the visitors there, you could have got a dose of vaccine free. At that time, a country which accepted free and universal vaccination has brought out a skewed policy, and there are a lot of lacunas, I would say, a lot of holes into the policy of this government. And it is precisely against the right, fundamental right, which has been bestowed on us, that is Article 21, right to life. Right to health is inherently part of it. And you obviously know that 25% people, we don't know whether it is 25% people or 25% product. We don't know that. 25% people have been left out. Think about 25 crores. 25% means 25 crores. Out of 25 crores, the upper class and the middle class would be hardly, I know Ram would be in a better position to say, it could be hardly 8 or 9 crores. Think about 18 crore people, which are left at the mercy of the marketplace. This is where we decided to go for an IP, and I am sure that the Supreme Court would appreciate this spirit behind it. And further, I am from Kerala, where we have been steadfast in ensuring there is a public health policy, and we have been ensuring that the people's life is protected. So these 2 factors prompted me to be part of this venture to go to the Supreme Court with an IP to ensure that the policy that has been brought over this country is changed.
So let me go to Professor Ramkumar. Sir, you have called this the earlier policy Tughlakian, in fact. Very strong words, I must say. And you've called the entire policy liberalized vaccination policy. Why?
Rukmini, the point to begin with here is that the vaccination policy of India with respect to COVID-19 was flawed from the beginning itself. I have tried to point out 2 or 3 very important failures of the government with respect to the vaccination drive. The first is that India failed to approve adequate number of vaccines, which meant that our vaccine basket was very narrowly defined. Because we saw it more politically rather than rationally or scientifically. We thought that thanks to our Atmanirbhar campaign, our Made in India vaccines would be adequate to vaccinate the entire population of India, which was completely wrong, as we saw in April and May when we faced a very severe shortage of vaccines. That was the first failure. The second failure of policy was in not making at-risk investments in vaccine companies, both for R&D purposes and also for capacity expansion purposes. Most countries of the world, the British government in AstraZeneca, or US government in Moderna Therapeutics, or the German government in Pfizer's associate, which is BioNTech, invested huge amounts of money to help them in R&D as well as capacity expansion. But not a rupee was spent in India for this purpose over the last 1 year. That was the second failure. The third failure is that India simply failed to book in advance adequate amounts of vaccines. While most countries of the world started booking in June 2020, and countries like Bangladesh booked in November 2020, Indian government made its first booking only in January of 2021, which was very late. So these were the three contexts in which the vaccine shortage of May were seen by many of us. From April 7th onwards, you saw a very severe shortage of vaccines in the country, which meant that vaccination centers had to be closed down, people approaching vaccination centers had to be turned back, and so on. So that created a huge problem. In that context, the first reversal of policy was made, which was on April 13th, when the government decided to give emergency use approval to a larger number of vaccines, which were already approved by a certain set of foreign drug regulatory institutions. The second shift of policy came on April 19th, which was what ultimately came to be known as Tughlaqian and quite disastrous in its impact. On April 19th, the government decided on a liberalized vaccine policy with effect from May 1st. What did it say? 50% of the vaccines only will be given free. Out of the remaining 50%, 25% will have to be purchased directly by the state governments, and another 25% can be purchased directly by private hospitals, both from private vaccine manufacturers. Now, these prices were not to be at the regulated prices that the central government used for itself. The prices were fixed at 300 and 600 for state governments, and 600 and 1,200 for private hospitals for Covishield and Covaxin respectively, exclusive of taxes, not inclusive of taxes. This meant that in about a week's time after April 19th, vaccine prices tripled or quadrupled in India. And these prices were simply unaffordable to millions of Indians on the one hand, and were providing super profits to vaccine companies on the other hand. So on both ends, so on the economic side, the April 19th policy was problematic because on the one hand, it made vaccines unaffordable to a large section of the population. On the other hand, it also allowed vaccine companies to make super profits. There was a political objective also, in order to allow the central government to evade responsibility for vaccine shortage. So the central government could now say that the vaccine shortages are not because of its own policy failures, but because the state governments did not order vaccines in time. So it could shift the blame onto state governments. That was the political objective of the April 19th policy. On both fronts, the government's policy failed. In the month of May and after, there was enormous amount of public anger and outrage at the continuing shortage of vaccines. The central government's efforts to shift the blame onto the state governments did not work as planned. People continued to pin the blame on poor vaccine planning of the central government. And also, finally, the Supreme Court took note of the issue and called it prima facie arbitrary and irrational, this policy. In this context, the central government did another change in its policy with effect from June 21st, where the earlier liberalized pricing policy was partially revised in the sense out of 100% of vaccines, instead of 50%, 75% would be purchased by the central government directly, but the 25% for private hospitals would remain intact. Now, this 25% reservation is what we have challenged in the Supreme Court now. Our argument here is that these vaccines, Covishield is priced at around 750 plus per dose, and Covaxin is priced at about 1,350 plus per dose. These are completely unaffordable to millions of Indians who are not just those below the poverty line, which is an obvious case, but even those above the poverty line, large sections of the lower middle class do not find this price as affordable. This means that at these prices, only the rich can go and purchase vaccines and get vaccinated. And this is as good as vaccines being reserved for the rich. And we consider this policy design as perverse, and we consider this as discriminatory. We also consider this as inequitable. And in this context, it is based on this kind of a framework that our petition has demanded in the Supreme Court that the 25% quota given for private hospitals should also be taken up by the government, number one. Number two, a regulatory body, as in the case of oxygen cylinders, should be formed under the direct monitoring of the Supreme Court to decide on which state gets how much vaccines, which should be typically based on socially desirable criteria, not based on commercial considerations or who can provide the highest price and so on. This is the essence of our petition in the court.
Well, I would have wanted to actually just focus on the 25% reservation for vaccine in private sectors. But because Mr. Britas is here and he's a politician, I just can't help but ask a political question, which is, Mr. Britas, what Professor Ramakumar is saying is almost amounting to, this is criminal. If a government which is responsible for protecting its people, and vaccination is the only way we could have saved people in second wave. The fact that we booked vaccines in January while others were booking around June, as you said, last year. How do you see this? How do you see this action or lack of action by central government?
Rukmani, look, it's almost 7 months that we have started vaccination in our country. Think about the state of affairs. Despite 6 to 7 months, we haven't even covered 4% of the population. I'm talking about the 2 doses. Now, in the meantime, we had Kumbh Mela and also a Mela in Bengal. Our political, I would say, the leadership was oblivious about the second wave that was sweeping across. Now, this is where the government of India bungled. State governments were running from pillar to post. I know very well that my chief minister wrote to the center at least 2 or 3 times. Thereafter, with despair, he tried to connect the other state governments. On May 29th, our chief minister wrote 11 chief ministers, exhorting them for a joint action, saying that the central government cannot abdicate its responsibility of ensuring public health, means vaccination for all, free vaccination. And it has to procure the vaccine and it has to distribute to the state free of cost. That was the crux of the letter that has been written by Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan to 11 chief ministers. Now, as Ramkumar rightly said, because of the pressure from the Supreme Court and serious strictures from the Supreme Court, and also because of the pressure from his own political party, that is BJP, and the serious hangama that was happening in Uttar Pradesh, which is going to face the election soon, Modi reversed his policy and came up with so-called 75:25. Now, our qualm is with regard to this 25%. Even this 25% is going to spoil the entire process. Even if it is 10%, it will be a big hole in the policy. Well-meaning people have been advising this government. See, the constitution has been very clear with regard to the responsibility of the government. I don't want to quote Article 39B, which says that ownership and control of the material resources of the community are so dispersed as best to subserve the common good. This is what Article 39B says so. Now what has happened? Now, as Ram Kumar rightly said, 25% of the population, if they have designed this policy with regard to the 75:25, in terms of population, let us assume that 24 to 25 crores of people are at the mercy of the government of India. I did a simple calculation. And with the rates that is prevailing, people will have to shell out something like 50,000 to 60,000 crores. Think about the 2 doses. Humongous cost is being involved. 50,000 to 60,000 crores. And think about the margin that is going to be made. It's going to be a killer profit that is going to be made by the pharmaceutical companies, vaccine companies. And also, can you ever imagine a vaccine? Think about a vaccine developed in India by Indian scientists, sponsored by the Indian government, and manufactured by an Indian company is most expensive. Expensive than the American vaccine. Forget about other vaccines in our poor countries. And the government hasn't even done anything to regulate the prices. Okay, assuming that a private sector need to be there, but you need to regulate the price. What is the qualitative difference between Covishield and Covaxin? I don't know. But what is the price difference? It's humongous. Can a democratic country like India bear with such sheer nonsense that is being thrust upon our throat? So now, again, let us see that. Let us see another thing. Now, Ram Kumar has been saying about the efficiency of the private sector. Inverter comma. In all our previous vaccination, which we have cited in our IP, that the contribution of the private sector in our previous vaccination programs, I mean, say 4% or 5%. 4% or 5%. Indian government used to float global tenders, procure the vaccine, distribute to states free of cost. And in addition to that, if at all a private venture needs to procure vaccine, they can procure the vaccine. Now there is going to be a huge divide between rich and poor, divide between urban centers and rural centers. We know what happened in the category of 1845. You had to book online. Think about those rural areas where hardly there is any Wi-Fi connectivity. Are they going to be in the queue? No. There is a digital divide that is there. Ram Kumar, who is a part of the academics, would tell you how the digital divide is affecting the country and the population. Now, if at all the tier 3, tier 4 towns or the rural centers are to be added to it, the real issue is going to start now. I am sure that most of these doctors, I won't blame the doctors, they are part of the private ventures, at least in rural areas. So much of bungling is going to happen. So much of pilfering is going to happen. So much of vaccines are going to be siphoned out. And there won't be any accountability. And let us assume, what is this for? Any government should have a long-term planning. Since vaccination is to protect the population, it is to ensure that we live on and we contribute to the society. Rukumani, think about the fact that if you invest 1 rupee in the infrastructure, that is the normal norm, which the economy says so. If you invest 1 rupee, the country is going to harvest at least 5 to 6 rupees. If you invest in health, it is going to prop up the economy too. Any sensible government would have pumped in money for a free universal vaccination, got the country back to track, kicked up the economy, and it would have thrived or survived. Now you have put the country at a risk, great risk. We don't know what is going to happen. Now I cited an amount like 50,000 crore. I am sure this 50,000 crore will go up. You know why? There will be a scramble for the vaccine. There will be a scramble for the vaccine. And people will be forced to shell out more. There won't be any accountability. There is no agency worth naming which can scrutinize this. Now, another point which I want to bring it is that you are saying that 25% of the vaccine, assume that is product wise, 25% of the vaccine would be earmarked for the private sector. What is the guarantee that if the vaccine companies will not be selling more than for 25%? What is the guarantee? Is there any agency to look at that? Now, we know what is experience. We have been just perusing the documents which were available. See, we understood that the big hospital networks, they cornered most of the vaccines. And in case the government of India, through what they say is that they will ensure that there will be rural participation with regard to private hospitals. Which private hospital in the rural sector has the financial competitiveness to procure the vaccine? And what if happens that there is going to be a scramble elsewhere? See, you are throwing the entire country to, I would say, despair, and the so-called inequity that is going to be created will tantamount to one of the biggest scams in the history of this country. The 50,000 I talked about is roughly the amount, if you calculate two doses of vaccine, say 2,500 rupees per head, and an average household will have at least five members in the family. Calculate the amount. In this distress, when Asim Premji Institute, which says that when most of the people say, even former Reserve Bank governors say that, the poverty is increasing, the people have been dumped, jobless, even in the organized sector, people have been rendered jobless. Think about a small family, the lower class family, a poor family has to shell out something like 20,000 rupees for vaccine. Can you imagine? So this is the mayhem that has been created by the government of India's policy, which is completely skewed. And we think that on many fronts, on many aspects, on many facets, the cardinal points of this vaccine need to be reviewed and revisited, and it should go back to the 1978 thumb rule of having a free and universal vaccination.
On that note, Professor Ramakumar, Mr. Britas is saying that universal vaccination is what we should look at. My audience would like to know, is there a precedence when something like this happens, when a pandemic happens and it's a surprise, it's a shock? Have we ever done this before, that the government has procured 100% vaccines and actually given it to its citizens?
My question is the other way around. Tell me a case where it hasn't been, right? Tell me a case where it has not been free. The WHO, for example, recognizes vaccines as a global public good. Okay, what is a global public good? A global public good typically means that vaccines should be available to everyone, everywhere, at all times, at an affordable rate, in a safe form, effective form, and it should also be easy to administer, right? So there are all these criteria which have to be met in the case of vaccines as a global public good. If you want to meet all these criteria, the only way, let it be a capitalist state or a socialist state or whoever it is, the only way is to provide it freely and universally. This is the experience of the world, and that is why even the developed capitalist world, as Britas was saying, United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, everywhere, they are giving it free of cost to everybody. Number one. Number two is that in India, because we have right to life under Article 21, and the Supreme Court has read the right to free vaccine as a subset of the right to life under Article 21, it is also the constitutional obligation as an enlightened welfare state of the Indian state to provide vaccines free of cost. Right? There's no justification for charging a price for vaccine. The third important reason is that most of these vaccines are made with public money. Right? Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, 97% of the funding has come from public sources. $2.5 billion were paid by Trump government to Moderna to develop their vaccine. 450 million euros were paid by the German government to BioNTech to develop their vaccine. In India, Covaxin is actually a vaccine where the public sector shares the intellectual property rights along with Bharat Biotech. Right? So you take every vaccine in the country, in the world, you will see substantial amount of public funding has gone into the development of these vaccines. Public funding means taxpayers' money. In other words, taxpayer has already paid for these vaccines. Now, you cannot ask the taxpayer to pay twice for the vaccine, primarily because it's not a soap or a toothbrush or toothpaste you're selling. It's a global public good that you're selling. So charging a person twice is simply unethical, right? The fourth important reason is that vaccines are, given the prices at which they are sold, Britas gave you the approximate numbers there, which is about 2,500 to 2,600 rupees per person for 2 doses. That cost per person per 2 doses is actually half the monthly income of a household at the poverty line in India, right? So if there are 2 adults going that way, that means 1 month's income is wiped out by the prices charged for the vaccine. In other words, what this unaffordability problem will do is that it will complicate and exacerbate the problem of vaccine hesitancy, which is already prevalent in our society. Right? So if you want to remove the problem of affordability out of the problem of vaccine hesitancy, it has to be free. Right? The final aspect is that if it has to be easy to be administered, then the vaccine market should not be fragmented. It should be unified. Now, part of the April 19th policy fragmented it to the maximum. It cut it into 3 pieces, central government, state government, and private hospitals. Now it is reduced to 2 pieces. Nevertheless, they are 2 pieces, not single piece. It is when you have a unified market for vaccines that you have an efficient market for vaccines, a transparent market for vaccines, and an equitable market for vaccines. If you want all these 3 things to be taken care of, efficiency, equity, and transparency, providing central government procuring, being the single procurer of vaccines, giving them to states free of cost, which the states will further give to citizens down the line, is the most efficient, transparent, and equitable way of distributing vaccines in the country. So I give you 4 or 5 reasons. There are many more reasons why vaccines should be free. And you can see, look around the world and see everywhere it is free. India is an anomaly in this global trend. We fail to understand why.
I have a follow-up question there from you, which is, if it's universally acceptable that vaccines, and it's accepted that vaccines should be free, as you mentioned, that it's a follow-up of right to life, and it's constitutionally also we are kind of responsible to provide vaccines. Why and how? What is the exact logic with which the government decided that 25% vaccine should be reserved for private sector? How did this logic come about?
You are looking for a rational reason behind an irrational decision, right? It's simply not possible. You will not have it. From day one, the vaccine policy, or rather the overall policy of the government with respect to the pandemic itself, has been ad hoc. It has not listened to experts. It has not listened to scientists. It has not listened to public health experts. It has also not listened to experienced civil servants who have had experience over many years in dealing with such issues on the ground. So the first problem here is that the government policy was flawed, and we don't know why it was flawed, because there is no rationale provided to us in the public domain as to why, on what basis those decisions were taken. In most cases, it appears politics has ruled over science or reason in deciding these policies. And this is the background in which you can see the April 19th decision and now the June decision on changing vaccine distribution policies. Now, you asked why this 25% has been retained. I can think of 1 or 2 reasons why it might have been, because we are still not told why. Remember, the policy was introduced stating that states wanted it, and hence we are introducing it. But later, detailed news reports came out that except one chief minister who wrote one sentence in a long letter, no other chief minister had demanded that states should be given freedom to purchase vaccines directly. That was a lie, right? So it was a made up reason. Now, when the policy was changed in June, the government said, because the state governments have failed, we are now taking this burden upon ourselves, right? Which again was a second lie, because it was the second lie to cover up a first lie, right? Now, the point about 25% is that I can think of one or two reasons why it has been done. One is that private vaccine companies have been lobbying with the government for some amount of freedom or leeway or space to continue to make super profits. And this 25% sale to private hospitals keeps the window open for these private vaccine companies to earn super profits. As we said, about 2,500 or 2,700 rupees per 2 doses. Remember, Krishna Ella of Bharat Biotech had earlier said, my vaccine would cost less than a bottle of water. Right? That's what he had said about a couple of months back. Now he has completely changed his policy. Now he says, I want maximum price for my vaccine. And that maximum price he has announced 1,200 rupees. Right? Now, exclusive of tax. Now, this means that private vaccine companies have now a certain window open to make super profits, which the government has allowed them to keep. Okay. The second reason is a large number of private industrial houses, companies, and factories, and so on, have been demanding with the government that they should be able to have vaccination camps for their workers or for their staff in their offices. Right? It appears that this is a second reason why the government has retained this 25%. But here again, the scams are now unfolding. Okay, in Maharashtra, for example, the news is coming out that about 2,500 people were over the last week vaccinated in fake vaccination camps. Right? In other words, we don't know what they were injected with. We are sure they are not COVID-19 vaccines. Maybe it was water. Maybe it was a dose of glucose. But
in UP, we have heard that rabies was given.
Rabies, we give that is very dangerous. But at least, I mean, in Maharashtra, we don't know what it has, what was injected. But certainly, these are fake vaccination camps which are making use of that 25% quota, right? If 100% was with the state government, then vaccinations would happen only in state government accredited camps. In such cases, the probability of pilferage or these kinds of scams can be avoided to a very large extent. But keeping 25% window open for private hospitals is actually not just keeping the window open for private companies and their super profits, but also for corrupt officials and lower ground officials to organize such scams on the ground and fleece people on an extraordinary scale. That is the problem with the 25% quota.
We're running out of time, but I'll ask Mr. Britas to close this discussion. What do you think, as a politician, you can do next? If you could tell us, I understand that there is an application now in Supreme Court, but as a new member of Parliament, if I may ask, what else can you do?
No, Rukmini, if you ask me as somebody part of the civil society, we have been trying to create so much of awareness, and that is a pressure that has come up. And one of the reasons why the government of India had to at least partially revisit their policy was because of the pressure. And with regard to me as a parliamentarian, nowadays, I don't think there is anything left, because now only parliament building construction is there, not the parliament proceedings. So very little can be done on that front. The third thing is that we all pin our hope on Supreme Court, because it's not Ram Kumar or Britas who has said, called or depicted the policy of the government of India irrational. Supreme Court, led by Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, depicted the policy of the government of India as arbitrary and irrational. And naturally, this will carry so much of weight. And Supreme Court is seized of the matter. In the meantime, I do feel that political parties, the state government, civil society, and everybody need to, academy, everybody has to, cobble and prop up a resistance against the irrational policy of the government of India. Only with such resistance, this skewed policy of the government of India can be corrected. And unless it is corrected, unless the policy, the deficiency is rectified, this is going to have far-reaching impact, as Ramkumar was saying about the fake vaccination happening in Maharashtra and very dangerous vaccination happening in UP. And you will see a lot of drama unfolding when the days come.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time.